We've talked about democratic legitimacy and what it is, the belief that democracy is the best form of government and that the democratic constitutional system has a moral claim to people's loyalty and obedience. We've talked about democratic consolidation as the deep embedding of that belief. Now today I'm going to talk about, in greater detail, about political culture. And I want to do three things today. I want to define, although I think I did that in my second lecture, I want to define what political culture is. I want to talk, I guess this was all in the first lecture, about what the components of democratic culture are. I want to explore those in greater detail. Then, of course, we'll return to the question of how do you measure this? And if you're trying to measure it at the elite level, it's actually very hard because elites are smart people and they may be deceptive about what they really believe. They may not tell it to you straight because they want to appear to be democratic in a democratic system. Although I will say that the new president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, actually had no problem at all over the last 2 decades and more of his parliamentary career revealing just how authoritarian he is in his values and instincts. So sometimes elites don't dissemble. They tell you what they think, and it's worth reading it, and you can draw inferences with respect to elite attitudes and values from what they write, what they say, but you can also draw inferences in terms of how they behave. It's much easier to measure mass political culture. We don't want to assume, particularly in non-democratic contexts, that people will always say exactly what they feel and think. They may be worried in non-democratic contexts about the consequences of being critical of the regime. In democratic societies, they might be worried about being politically incorrect. They often lie about whether they voted in the last election because they don't want to admit that they didn't vote. Or they may not remember that they didn't vote. They'd like to think of themselves as good citizens. So it's not straightforward and simple to measure political culture at the level of the general mass public as well, but it is easier, and we do think we've developed good tools for that, as I've tried to share with you. And so we'll take those tools and we'll start trying to evaluate one set of arguments about the political culture literature, which has to do with whether democratic values are universal. Not just belief in democracy, but belief in the kind of liberal package around democracy of accountable government and people and the government being at the same level, and whether there should be political deference or accountability of the rulers to the ruled, which is more important, freedom or order, and how liberal should a democracy be. So we've got measures that can get at all that, and to some extent that I think provide a test for the Asian values thesis, okay? So with that, we can begin on the political culture front conceptually and just say that by political culture, we mean the predominant beliefs, values, attitudes, hopes and ideals, feelings, sentiments, and also evaluations that people have in society about their political system and about how individuals in the political system should behave. Now, values are always deeper than attitudes. Attitudes can be more fleeting. How do you think the president is doing? Do you approve or approve of his conduct? Do you have a lot of trust, some trust, a little trust, or no trust in the Congress, the judiciary, or whatever branch of government it may be? Those can change a lot over time. I've told you that satisfaction with the way democracy is working in the country may change as well. There could be a corruption scandal, it plummets. The people who are charged with corruption may be prosecuted and thrown to jail, and then it improves. So the democracy is doing well and in terms of economic performance, and people are more satisfied, and then there's a government shutdown, and 800,000 federal workers are not getting paid, and I got to believe that the percentage of Americans who are satisfied with the way democracy is working in the United States right now, today, is on January 22nd of 2019, is a little lower, and maybe a lot lower than it might have been 6 weeks ago. Anyway, we have these different components of how people think, feel, believe, and evaluate politics and their own role in the political system. And these may generally create a portrait of the society that we can call a national political culture, but there may be what we call subcultures. There may be different groups in society, different portions of society that have different ways of looking at politics. And these may come from a lot of different sources. They may be shaped by education. They may be shaped, and indeed they are in the United States, by region and history, social class, religion, and all sorts of other things. All right, political culture can be thought of as having basically three components. One is the cognitive orientation. What's in people's kind of knowledge portion of their brain? What do they know and believe about the political system and how it works, how it's structured, and so on? So some of this is knowledge, some of it is a kind of rational belief. Then there is the affective orientation. Affectation involves emotion, feeling of excitement, attachment to a charismatic individual, enthusiasm, disgust, anger, as I said, corruption. Patriotic orientation may come in here. And the third is the evaluative orientation, which has two components. First of all, the deep-seated values people have about what's right, so we start getting into legitimacy, and we start getting into what people feel they have a right to expect from their state and their political system. And then they weigh the performance of that system in light of their principles, their values about what they think government should be like and how it measures up against their standards, their values. So those are the three components that come early on from the late Stanford political scientist Gabriel Almond, who actually was one of my professors, and his work on political culture, including this famous book that he published with Sidney Verba in 1963, which was really the first systematic cross-national effort to understand attitudes and values toward democracy in 5 different societies, including the US, Germany, and Mexico. Okay, here are some key assumptions. Yeah?
How do you distinguish between the different sort of aspects of political culture when you're like sort of analyzing a particular culture? Because it seems like the three can oftentimes like link with each other, and it seems difficult to separate them if you're trying to.
You mean the evaluative, the cognitive, and the affective?
Yes. So it seems like
well, you know, look, one shapes another, right? Obviously, if you have very strong emotions, they're going to seep into your beliefs, and they may also constrain and shape what you know. Because in the current world, we are so polarized that what you know or you think you know is being heavily shaped and constrained by what sources of information you're seeking out. So if you're watching one set of cable television news programs and reading the newspapers and the tweets that correspond to that strong political viewpoint, you may think that we have a raging crisis of climate change that is an existential threat to human civilization, or you may think it's all a hoax, and et cetera, et cetera. So these three dimensions are certainly intimately related, and it's not easy to separate them. Okay, so here are some assumptions of political culture theory. They may be wrong, but they are some of the guiding theoretical ideas that help to shape the emergence of this body of political and social science work from decades ago. One assumption, which I think we should question, and we can use data to evaluate, is that there are relatively distinct and enduring features of the way the people of a country and the people of a region think and feel about politics. And if you think, as Huntington does in The Clash of Civilizations, that there are these distinct and enduring ways that different national, regional, and if you're reading Huntington, to some extent, religiously shaped cultures, including the Islamic world, the Hindu world, the Orthodox Christian world of Central and Eastern Europe, the West. If you think these give rise to distinct and long-lasting ways of looking at politics, political order, what is kind of right in the political system, then you may think, first of all, there's relatively little we can do to change it. Second of all, there are whole portions of the world, such as Muslim majority countries, that don't represent very good prospects for democracy, certainly, look pretty hopeless in terms of liberal democracy, and, probably are going to wind up coming into a clash of civilizations with, the kind of Christian Enlightenment-driven societies of Western Europe, North America, and so on. So at the extreme end, scholars speak of national culture, that there are, forget about Russia. The national culture of Russia is and has always been deeply authoritarian, suspicious of outsiders, illiberal. It's not going to change. The effort to bring democracy to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union was a fool's errand. It was probably never going to work. That's just the way they are. And of course, by this logic, things don't look so hopeful in Ukraine either. It's part of that Orthodox Christian Eastern civilization, or at least from the eastern half of Ukraine out, and that's just the way things are, and we shouldn't expect much more. So from this sort of classic, more deterministic and kind of culturally essentialist view of political culture, it is, it drives from deep civilizational roots, is kind of got deep roots in history. It shapes and constrains the way the people of a country, maybe not every single last person, but the average person it behaves and thinks about politics, and that's the way things are. For some political culture theorists, key political orientations tend to be crystallized early in life through the socialization process. This is what they learn in the home. There may be very authoritarian family patterns in the home that are shaping this, and then they're passed on through this socialization process. They're crystallized in the schools. Then this is kind of what is fixed in the heart and the mind of the average citizen once they get to adulthood. And after that, forget it. This is who they are, and they're not going to change, and it just is reproduced over generations. From this perspective, political learning, which implies adult socialization or resocialization, that citizens are not captives of their family rearing practices, their primary and secondary education, their country's history, that they can take in new experiences in terms of including what's going on in the rest of the world, evaluate what's happening in their own political system, its achievements and its failures, and come to new beliefs and new judgments about what's right or ideal politically. The idea that this can happen is not dismissed entirely, but it's considered to be unlikely, difficult, maybe requiring something on the order of the defeat of Germany in World War II, absolute national catastrophe. For others, now we get into debates about what shapes political culture. This is not the right way to think about it, that people are open to new experiences, that the process by which people arrive, not just at their more superficial and fleeting attitudes, but even their deeper values and beliefs, is open to change over time, to experience, to deliberate efforts at socialization in light of national experience, and that people go through some kind of process of lifelong learning. Now, this is encouraging. If you are coming out of an authoritarian context, it creates the possibility that people may transform even in their deeply seated values to more democratic values, but it also opens the possibility that we shouldn't take anything for granted in Western societies, that people may reevaluate their kind of superficially expressed or arrived at commitments to democracy in light of new evidence as well, including maybe extreme inequality, long-term economic decline, social and economic stresses and polarization, and so on and so forth. So this is a long-standing debate in the political culture literature. When you get to those deeper values, how deeply rooted are they, and how open are they to change?